Hey guys, and welcome back to the Napkin Notes podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Evans. How you doing? Happy Thursday if you are listening on release day. I'm finishing up a little bit of peppermint tea before I jump in to the rest of my day. But also, I'm reflecting a little bit on last night. So I went to an event at Soho House here in Austin, Texas. The event is called Women in Biz, and my friend Hannah, I met her in Nashville, puts this on in different cities across the nation at different Soho houses. And I had the opportunity to speak for just a couple minutes about the podcast before the main event, which was a fireside chat with a gal named Allison Ellsworth. She is the co-founder of the brilliantly branded Poppy brand. So Poppy is the pre and probiotic beverage I'm sure you've seen all over socials and just kind of all over in general. It's a healthier swap for soda. But it was really inspiring to hear how she created this product, started in her kitchen, took it on the Shark Tank, got a deal, and then now she is, I think they've done over $100 million of sales, the largest soda beverage or pop beverage on Amazon. And so it was just really inspiring to go and be around other business owners, hear from Allison, and it was a good reminder to my introverted heart. While I might be outgoing, I would say I'm still pretty introverted at the end of the day. It was just a good reminder to go out and be inspired by people and places and things to get the creative juices going. I feel like I left with so many business ideas and ideas for this podcast. So just a reminder to all of us introverts out there, get your tails out, go get inspired by some people, places, and things, and see just kind of what comes to you. And speaking of inspirational, our guest is nothing short of that. I had the chance to sit down with my friend, Mattie Jackson, on Music Row in Nashville, Tennessee. Mattie is an author. She's a speaker. She's a podcaster. I actually had the honor of personally helping to launch and create her podcast back in 2022. Mattie has now released 2 books. Her second book just came out. Her first book was called Lemons on Friday, bestseller, and it really walks through her journey of grief after she walked through a deep tragedy in her life. But something that you'll learn about Mattie when she approached me about her podcast a couple years ago is she wanted to also show people that you can walk through deep, deep grief and there is still joy to be found on the other side. So I think that you'll find resilience, a deep, steady faith in Mattie's words, and how to feel things and know that there is more to come in life as well. So while Mattie has helped so many women with her words walk through grief, I think you'll kind of see a different side of Mattie today from our chat. We talk about her 2 passions, which is writing and hospitality. We chat about what it was like for her growing up in kind of an iconic family with a very famous father in country music, which you'll hear all about. We talk about how she opened one of my favorite wine bars in 2016 in Nashville, and she was only in her 20s. And this was before I even knew Mattie. That place was one of my favorites. We also chat about the 4 practices that she has just now written about in her latest devotional, Through the Valley of Grief, and how she was able to extrapolate those from her own life to help others going through a similar journey. And then we kind of wrap up at the end with, it was not really planned, kind of off the cuff discussion about what it looks like to transition through different seasons, when to start a season, when to know how to end one. And so I was just really grateful for her presence of mind and the way that we were able to chat through that conversation, because it was something that I really related to. So yeah, that was one of my favorite parts. It was just kind of unexpected and like a very present moment thing, and just sort of chatting through what life looks like when things change. And something else fun about Mattie is she's a certified sommelier. I have no idea still if I am saying that right, but essentially she's an expert in wine. I love a good glass of wine, but I don't know a ton when I go out of like what to order or what to have or what I love and what I don't love. So I feel like it was a missed opportunity if I didn't do a little tasting with Mattie. So the night before we recorded, I texted her and I was like, hey, can you give me 2 suggestions of an affordable bottle of wine, 1 red, 1 white, maybe like $15 to $30 range that you love that might be impressive, and would you sip on them with me? She said absolutely. So you'll hear, or if you're watching on YouTube, you will see that at the end of our conversation, we go through 2 different wines. I will leave all of the information in the show notes of what those were. Spoiler, I did love both of them. And I feel like the biggest thing though was that I walked away knowing what I like for the next time I order a glass of wine out. Like I have some verbiage around it now. So thank you, Mattie, for that. But Be sure to give Mattie a follow on Instagram at Mattie Jackson. Her latest devotional is Through the Valley of Grief. It's a 365-day devotional of spiritual practices for hope and suffering. So be sure to pick that up for you and maybe a couple friends too. But I love this conversation with Mattie, and I can't wait for you guys to experience it as well. Here is my conversation with Mattie Jackson. Mattie, welcome to the podcast. We have author, podcaster, certified sommelier, and one of the kindest hearts in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome to the podcast.
I've never had that on a resume, but I appreciate it.
It's there forever now. It's recorded.
I'm so glad to be with you. As we know, your listeners may not, you've been such a huge part of my journey into this space too. And so I'm just really excited to be across the mic, honestly.
This is fun.
Yeah.
We've just been kind of like giggling even before we started recording, but as I was preparing for this, I was trying to remember our paths crossed back in, was it 2019?
I couldn't tell you. And I feel like we had this conversation maybe at Otto's that day that I was like,
Otto's,
let's get drinks. I need your direction. But it was many years ago when at one of the Nashville kind of service events or something, like maybe product drives or fundraisers or something. And I honestly don't remember.
I don't remember either. I don't know how our paths crossed because it was right at the beginning of me starting my agency, and you were volunteering and working a lot with, not volunteering, you had started that nonprofit organization called Nashville. And I think were you working with In Slavery Tennessee at the time too?
Yeah, they're one of our big partners. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that might have been it because I started working for basically like anti-sex trafficking organizations when I was living in Virginia. Started volunteering here in Tennessee with them. And then maybe that's where our path crossed for the first time. Because were you doing a podcast back then as well?
Yeah, I did. Okay. I did one, for years. That was sort of when we started Nashville, which did just kind of raise money for organizations like In Slavery. We had 3 different missions and would give to nonprofits serving those missions. But that was part of what I came in and said, listen, I know this is kind of new. Like we launched in 2018, end of the year. And so I said, I want to do a podcast just for the people that support us, just to learn about us, to learn about these causes, and just to have a way to connect with them more than, hey, can you give money to this? And kind of pour into them, in an inspirational way. And so I had no idea what I was doing. Yeah. And I think probably after meeting you, that was, if I were to guess, it was, hey, can you make sure I'm doing this right? So it was a big learning curve, but it was so fun. It was so fun. And just talk to people locally, really, who had stories of inspiration.
I do think the way that you just jumped into starting your first podcast with Nashville is such a testament to your personality. You get a really good idea in your brain and Mattie just goes for it.
Yeah, blindly optimistic is what that's been called. Yeah.
Kindest heart and blindly optimistic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that's such a good trait because I think that's why you've been able to accomplish so much. I feel like you've had a couple different seasons in your life.
For sure.
Because there's kind of the hospitality aspect of what you love with the wine, the sommelier element, and the restaurant that you had here. And then obviously we have your second book sitting here as well. So I would kind of say there's 2 loves in your passion from hospitality and writing. Was there somebody growing up that really kind of influenced and inspired one or the other or both growing up?
Yeah, I was sitting here kind of laughing internally when the blindly optimistic and all these projects and things, and just thinking of my dad, and that's just how he is. And, he's obviously his career is songwriting and performing. He's a country artist. But he came here and he always says, people ask him all the time, like, how did you, make your way in the music industry? Like, how did you find the courage to come to Nashville? All these things. And he just said, honestly, I was dumb enough not to know better. Like, and so it's like, that's kind of a joke, but it is that blind optimism. And so I think I always saw him just do things full-heartedly, without a lot of fear of what if it doesn't work. And so for me, I think the different seasons and kind of passions and endeavors that I've had come a lot from seeing him do that, in his life. But I mean, the writing aspect, obviously, I attribute to him. He's a wonderful songwriter, and even all the success he's had commercially with albums and tours and all this kind of stuff, like he still just loves the writing, and that's, he's older now and he's got one more little tour that's like 10 or 12 shows. And And he would have hung that up years ago, you know, if he could have. You know, his heart is still the writing, and I think he'll keep making music. And so for me, storytelling and writing, not musically, I'm not much beyond a karaoke bar, you know, to sing, but that was a passion I had. And so that had always kind of been there. And then the hospitality part, you know, I don't know. I'd always loved cooking with my mom and my grandmothers. And, you know, I am a sommelier. Wine was never really a thing that was a part of their life in a big way. So I kind of came to after college. But the hospitality part, you know, they were the people and we were the family that all the friends would come to watch games or cook out or have pool parties or whatever. And so they just had this open door policy, I guess, to people. And that's something that I've always admired and appreciated and what I hope I can build, you know, now with my family. And so I guess that sort of laid the foundation for that too. And so when I started learning about wine, I was like, wow, this makes this even more fun. This cooking and all of these parties and dinners and stuff. So I think it was really a lot attributed to my parents.
Well, we'll do a little wine tasting later on because I was telling everybody, it feels like a missed opportunity to be in your presence and not get some of your insights on some things. But I love that it was both of your parents because obviously with your dad's career and watching him really go for it, I can only imagine what you just sort of see growing up and you're like, oh, I can do this too. Yeah. Just being able to be a mirror of that. And I love that your mom was so hospitable and loved to have people over and y'all's was the house growing up. Can we tell the people who your dad is? Is this okay?
Yeah, for sure. My dad is Alan Jackson. He's a highly acclaimed, world-renowned, platinum selling, country music hall of fame, country singer-songwriter. Yeah. And he's the best. I mean, he's going on 35-year career now, which is so unusual.
It is wild, Mattie.
In music. It's funny to be sitting here on Music Row and, you know, he really had the Nashville story, you know, in like the 80s and 90s and moved up, as he said, too young and dumb to know better and came up here in 1985. You didn't ask for his history, but, basically gave my mom, you know, broke. They lived in a rental apartment. 30 minutes from here, right by the airport. They rented a basement apartment from a woman who worked at the Grand Ole Opry. And that's where I came home from the hospital too. So he gave my mom, he said, I'll give this 5 years. And if I can't support us with music, then I'll get a real job. And his first record went #1 in May of 90. And I was born in June. So it was,
that's all you've known.
Yeah, truly my whole life.
And so your mom married him with having no idea if this dream was going to work.
No, they're high school sweethearts. They were 19 and 21, which they have advised all of us our whole life to never get married that young. They said they're an anomaly.
They're the exception.
So they were just kids. They've truly grown up together.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was there something growing up that was very normal for you, but looking back was very much the exception since your dad is such an icon?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think the experiences we got to have, you know, are very unique, of course, just getting to travel to all these places that we got to travel to and meet, you know, other artists and just, I mean, the biggest one is just, I remember being at the White House and being 10, you know, and that was
That's such a one.
That was a very poignant moment that like even at 10 or 11 you realize, okay, this is unusual.
This is different.
But to their credit, you know, our day-to-day lives didn't feel any different from anyone that we went to school with.
Almost like the first tagline in the most normal famous family person in Nashville, but I thought kind-hearted was a little bit more accurate.
Yeah, I appreciate both. Yeah, but they did a wonderful, wonderful job in that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love too that I just think it's so important too. I was talking to Cheese Gal Courtney earlier in the season, and she's had so much success as she's grown her brand. And I told her what a great example that is for her girls growing up, that you can just see your mom doing that or see your dad doing that and being able to experience that maybe later on for their dreams coming up too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's looking back, it's amazing that was the example that we got to have, not just like his commercial success in that you can succeed even when you come from, I mean, really nothing. Yeah. But also that you can succeed and still be humble. I think that's what I admire the most about him and about my mom is that they, my gosh, I mean, they're the same in ways. They're the same kids they were, you know, they got married. Like he wants a blue plate mayonnaise and banana sandwich at the lake last weekend. And it's like, what you can have anything in the world, and that's what he wants.
That's what he
wants. So
wants.
it's just, I respect that so much, I think, almost as much as everything else.
Everything else that he's done. So growing up, where did you go to college again?
I went to Tennessee.
You went to
University
UT.
of Tennessee.
Okay. Well, is it UT still?
It's UT.
And then Texas is Tex.
It's
They all
an
changed.
ongoing debate. Yeah.
Okay. And then what did you major in college?
Creative writing.
Creative writing. Okay. So it wasn't hospitality initially.
No.
Okay. And then what did you do coming right out of school?
So coming out of school, so I had the creative writing degree, which that was sort of where I always had that love in high school and did some writing and speaking things like for school. But then studied English creative writing and knew, at 18 or 19, like I wanted to write. Like I just felt like that seed was really planted in my heart and had no idea what that would look like, but I loved it. And so, I joke coming out of school with an English degree, like nobody's trying to give you a job. So I moved to Austin, where you are now, just on a whim, and got a job in a steakhouse. And because wine is such a part of the steakhouse experience, that's a big part of our training. And like I said, growing up loving food and hospitality, I fell in love with it. And there's just full-fledged admission here. Like I'm just such a nerd. I love school. I love learning anything. Like I'll go way too into the deep end on any new thing because I want to learn about it.
Are you an Enneagram 3?
Yes.
Okay. But that can be a 5 trait too.
Yes,
Maybe that's why
totally.
you and I get along so well. Yeah.
And so when this whole world of like wine opened up, not only is it delicious and fun, but I was like, there's a lot to learn here. And that was when the big Somm documentary had gotten popular.
Yes.
And so I really dove into that in my time in Austin, in those 2 years in Texas, and loved it. Just fell in love with that world because it is academic if you really want to learn about it. It's social because you're always serving, you're always hosting, you're always meant to enjoy it with everyone else, that's why the bottle is made with 5 servings. And so I felt like that. And then sort of the cultural aspects of learning about all these different places and what goes into it, as a culture, I loved it. So anyway, I nerded out on wine. I got my sommelier certification and worked with an importer there. I worked, at a restaurant and even went to Napa for 6 months and worked with a winery there that had been there, one of the founding kind of wineries from the 70s in Napa. And it was awesome. And I just wanted to learn it up and down, and I did. And then eventually came back to Nashville. And that was sort of, I don't know, a year or two after the Nashville boom started to happen. And just said, we've never had much of a great wine presence outside of steakhouses here. We've always been the beer and bourbon town, which I love. But I wanted to sort of bring people in touch with the more familiar side of wine, I guess, that I experienced in Austin, where it wasn't quite as fussy and formal. You're there. People there are so laid back and chill, and they'll be in ripped jeans and a t-shirt and open a $500 bottle of wine with you, or they'll be dressed to the nines and have a $10, bottle of cava just to celebrate. And so I thought, to me, that was very representative of Nashville, is you can have high quality and a casual kind of encounter.
Yeah.
And so I had a wine bar here for 2 years and loved every minute of it and got to kind of do that.
I loved that wine bar too, Mattie.
Yeah.
Even before I knew it was yours.
Yeah.
I went there all the time.
It makes me feel great. The number of people, in retrospect, 6 years ago since it's closed, who've said, oh, I didn't know that was yours. Like I loved Salt and Vine and I did too. And so that was a really fun, kind of first professional adult chapter of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there one surprising fact that you can give us about wine that will make us seem knowledgeable the next time we go in somewhere?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think one thing that has helped me a lot as a consumer and that I try to tell people, is it's almost less about learning like specific grapes that you like as much as it is learning like, do you like a light or full body? And do you like oak? I think that would be my tip.
Okay.
You will inevitably sound snobby if you're like, is this an oaked wine or an unoaked wine? But that makes almost more of a difference in like the body and the style of the wine than you can realize. So like if you like Pinot Noir, but you like an oakier wine, there are Pinot Noirs that have a lot more time in oak that feel bigger. Or like if you think you don't like Chardonnay because it's big and buttery, you can have one that's unoaked and it's crisp and bright and like awesome with tacos. So to me, that would be something to learn that really kind of transcends across all different types of wine that you can ask, at a store or a restaurant or whatever.
I don't know why this keeps coming up in all of our conversations that I've had on the podcast so far, but I took 2 classes in college that were I needed to stay an extra semester. I could have graduated early, didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
One of them was flower arranging, which I was awful at.
That's great.
I got an A in physics, B- in floral arranging.
That's hysterical.
History of wine was the other one.
Really?
And that one has been extremely helpful.
I don't know if you ever told me that.
Yeah, I took a wine class.
That's awesome.
Do you follow Gary Vaynerchuk?
Yeah, for sure.
So part of our curriculum each week was to watch 2 or 3 of Gary V's videos, but this was as he was actually putting them out. So this was 2010.
Yeah.
So he was not the Gary Vaynerchuk that he is today. We sent in a video for him to come speak at the school. So he came to Virginia Tech,
How cool.
spoke for free, which was a huge thing for him. Went out with all the kids afterwards. And so,
awesome.
yeah, that was kind of where my love or interest of wine came from. Because
Yeah.
similar to you, like my parents didn't really drink growing up.
Yeah.
So that wasn't really a part of our like family culture. But yeah, I'm not sure how my parents really felt about me taking a wine class in college and paying for some extra credits for that. But I do remember that being something like, oh, this is going to kind of open me up to other opportunities later on. So after I graduated and then got my first job, they kind of interview different places. They take you out to dinner to see if you like the job. But I felt much more comfortable being able to order a glass of wine after that class.
For sure.
Otherwise I would have had no clue.
I think it's really, obviously a big proponent of it, but I think it's really special and kind of, like I referenced earlier, even just the way it's made is intended to share or intended to pair with a meal. Like one of the big kind of jokes or little sayings, like in the wine world, is what grows together goes together. So it's like, if you're trying to pair and you want a Tuscan wine, like get some Tuscan cheese, it's just like that kind of is the way that it goes. And so I think that format was always appealing to me. And then there's something about wine to me that's different from, a beer or a cocktail or whatever, that has a very memorable experience. Like I kept corks for a really long time,
Yeah,
and
that's a
you
great
date
point.
them and sign them, and there's just something about it being oriented around a celebration or a meal, that to me is really special, that in a way like music kind of does. It's like you hear that song in your back in 6th grade, riding in your big sister or brother's, the back of their car, whatever. And you have a wine and you're like, oh, I remember doing this with these people. Mm-hmm. And that may just be me, but that's part of my appeal.
No, I'm with you. When I first moved to Austin, I went to, I want to call it J. Alexander's, but I don't know if that's right. It was a steakhouse, and I didn't realize I had ordered a very expensive glass of wine. They just said this one was good, and so I said, sure. It was a glass of Barolo.
Always checks the price. That's another good wine
This was
tip.
something that I learned. I wasn't paying that night, thank goodness, but I ordered 2 glasses of this specific wine, and it wasn't, I don't know, to me this is expensive. It was like maybe $60 a glass.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, I felt kind of badly at the end of the night.
Yeah.
But every time I have a Barolo now, I think about that. Like
It's
the first time I moved to Austin, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know any of the places. Clearly didn't know what Barolo was at that point in time. But you're right. Like it does take me right back to those memories of first moving, the excitement and the nerves and the what am I doing? But I know this is the right thing kind of feeling. So
I agree.
So when you moved from Austin to Nashville and opened up the wine bar, how did you know that these were the right next steps for you?
I don't know that I did inherently. I was very new. Like I have no business background. Like I said, I have an English degree. And I was very educated about wine, and having grown up here, I felt confident that this was a hole in the market that especially younger people or people moving from bigger metropolitan cities would be ready for or would enjoy. And so the accessibility part of wine was what I felt like was maybe missing here. And so in that way, it felt like the right time. But to tell you the truth, I just put people in place that were a lot more knowledgeable than me in terms of, real estate and location, in terms of finances and fundraising, in terms of literally running a restaurant. Like my partner in the business was a girl that I became friends with in Austin who grew up in hospitality, her whole life. And so to put those people in place who could fill in the gaps that I had was the only way that it happened. And we were laughing before about like hosting podcasts and handing over the production, even though you're very skilled at that. But it allowed me to do what I did, which was connect with the people and really be sort of the conduit of here's a really, foreign product to you, and here's how I can translate, how you can experience it. And so honestly, I just put smarter people in place than me to do the stuff that I didn't know how to do.
Well, I think that's really good advice, because I do think that I get the question a lot of like, how did you start your business, or how did you figure out what your passion was? And I think that the outlet of your passion can look different in different seasons. Mm-hmm. And I think for you found this love of hospitality, and then you had the idea of starting a restaurant or starting this wine bar. And then to your point, you just start to delegate out the things you don't know. And I think that's where limiting mindsets can come in, is, I don't know how to do this, or I can't do this part of XYZ. And then people just kind of stop. Yeah. But I think it's so smart that your viewpoint was your passion is for connection. That's your skill set. That's your strength. Put people around you that can help highlight that for you.
Yeah.
I think it is hard when we try to do everything, especially at the beginning of something.
Yeah.
And you're stepping outside of your skill sets, you're stepping outside of your strengths, and then you just kind of get weighed down by that.
Well, you can. And to be honest, I think as I had the restaurant for 2 years, and as it started to grow, I did take on more of the burdens of operations and things like that. It was a financial choice to try to take some of that on myself.
Yeah.
And while it was a sound financial choice, it did start to rob me of the joy of why I started it.
Yep.
And that was a really good lesson to learn at 26, 27.
Wow,
and
you were so young.
I didn't have the skills to do the payroll. I mean, I could, but it usurped so much time and energy that the things that I was good at, like marketing and connecting and doing the wine classes and that sort of thing and training the staff, the time for that was marginalized. If I could have just delegated to someone who could have done it in half the time,
right?
Because they have the skills. And so that has benefited me tremendously just in any other project. I mean, my goodness, you helped me launch my podcast. There were questions that I was like, I cannot text this question to Elizabeth, because she is going to think like they teach this in like 7th grade computer class, like this girl. But I didn't know, and I knew you knew. And so I was just like, I want to focus on the stories, and I have learned enough, and I can be humble enough to say, I don't know how to do this silly thing.
And I don't want to take an hour to figure it out.
Can you just tell me? So,
and that's what I tell people is like, I save you time.
Yeah.
And then I save you a lot of episodes that you wish that you could go back and do differently.
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you what to look for ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so I do think that you're right. Having a coach, having a mentor, having somebody that has gone down the road before you that you want to go down.
Yeah.
It does save you time, and it not regret, but just you learn a lot of lessons through somebody else rather than the mistakes that you learn on your own.
Yeah, for sure. I think that at some point you have to trade in pride for time management. Yeah. And it hurts a little, but like just work smarter, not harder, right? I mean, that's a silly phrase, but it's true.
So you had the restaurant for 2 years, and then what did life look like after you closed that down?
So I opened, June of 16 and closed June of 18, something like that. And it was partly a financial decision because it is so tough in that industry, and it was a big space. And so we had a hard time kind of generating
it was a big space
revenue to cover all that. But it was also a personal choice. I had just gotten married like the fall prior, so less than a year. And, when I was opening it and running it the first year or so, had no problem working 15, 16 hours because I was single and this was my baby. But when your life pivots, I didn't want to forecast that for the next 2, 5, 10
totally
years.
Get that.
And so when I closed it, I kind of felt this, continued tugging of the writing, right, that had always been there. And even over the course of those years, everything I did with wine, loving every minute, I always felt a little bit of that tug of like, I'm not using this gift, but I had no idea how to even start or what that would look like or what I would write about. And so when I closed the restaurant, I was sort of like, okay, let's just talk to some folks locally who've written about the restaurant. Maybe I can just do some freelance for like covering food and wine stuff here, or maybe that's the direction, right? Like that's the only thing I really have a lot of expertise in. And started to look into that and just really be really prayerful about like, where is this going to go? And as sort of a sidebar, I did have this seed kind of to help women, younger women, because I mean, I was only 28, but a lot of the women who work for me were in college, or right out of college. And, at the end of a shift or in the middle of a shift or whatever, they so often ended up in my office, just like talking life and crying together and praying for them and all this. And so I think there was this also sort of desire in there to use whatever was next to help women. And so that's where Nashville came in. I connected with a friend of a friend who wanted to start this foundation to just highlight organizations serving women and children, specifically victims of trafficking, widows and orphans, or, adoption, foster care, that kind of thing. And so I felt very called to that and started working with her to set that up. And then as that was growing and being built, my husband, Ben, passed away very suddenly, 2 months after I closed the restaurant. And it was a few weeks before our first wedding anniversary. So that was obviously something that, changes every aspect of your life. And so when that happened, my only response, and it was such an innate response, was to write. And so, I didn't do it for anyone else. I started journaling, to simply understand what I was feeling, to understand grief. I had never gone through anything tragic, in my life. And so to be totally weighed down by the gravity of that loss, I just started to write. And thankfully, thank God, I had started building this organization, which before Ben ever passed, we wanted widows to be one of our missions to serve. And that was simply because, the Bible says take care of orphans and widows. And that's how Brooke and I both believe. And so for that outlet to sort of be set up before I ever lost Ben was such a miracle, because we had connections to these two organizations really that serve widows. And so not only did I have those women to walk through it with me, but I had these other people that I could walk it with. And so I just started writing, to really manage my own grief. And then in getting to know all these other women, I realized we need a voice of someone ahead of us kind of in this journey, because it's so unique and so debilitating. And so that was, sort of the answer to that little tug of what am I ever going to do with this passion? And I don't know if I've said it to you, but I've said it a lot. It's like my dad told me as a writer when I was 21, when I graduated from college, he said, you're a good writer, but you need to live your life. And that's what you're going to write about. And so to see that come true, and for that first story to be a story that I didn't want to tell, I didn't want that to be my story. I didn't want that to be my first book and my second book, but that was a powerful story that as I lived through it, that gifting and that desire ended up coming out in a way that healed me first, and since has thankfully been able to help other people go through grief and healing and all of that. And I mean, there's just looking back at the breadcrumbs of your life. And I know most people feel this way once they're in their 30s, like we are. It's like, now it all makes sense. And now that desire and now that tragedy all come together in this beautiful way that make everything have purpose and have legacy. And so, yeah, it was nothing I did. I truly did what my dad told me, live your life and you'll know what you're going to write about. And that's happened in the last, 6 years.
Wow. And you've stewarded so well. This gifting, your story, I feel like the responsibility that the Lord has bestowed upon you, and I'm sure at some points it's felt like a burden, but your gifting for writing and communicating and connecting is so unique and so given just for you, Mattie. So thank you so much for continuing to use your voice and to use your words. And I can only imagine the amount of people that reach out to you saying, thank you so much for writing these books and these words for us, and going first. And being a voice for people that maybe don't even have the words for what they're feeling yet.
Yeah. I think that's what's so hard about it. It's any tragedy, any loss of any kind, not just a death, but it just reorients your whole life and you lose so much of who you are in relationship to that person or that profession or that season, whatever this huge loss is. You lose a lot of who you are, and it's hard to find the words to kind of build yourself back up and rediscover who you are without that person or that thing. And so to have somebody go before you, is invaluable. And I had those women in my personal relationship, but there really wasn't much out there to reach onto or read or cling to hear somebody else say like, I get it. I've had that struggle. I've made that mistake. And here's the hope that you can see in my life if you can't see hope in your own yet.
Yeah.
Like that's what I needed.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope, my life has been for other people these past years.
Standing in the gap for them.
Yeah.
I'm going to grab your book here, Through the Valley of Grief. Mattie brought this today. This is the first time that I've seen it in person.
The first time I saw it a few days ago. So,
and you have 4 pillars in here of walking through grief: wail, connect, worship, and hope. Were these 4 different kind of practices that you walked through yourself during your grieving process?
Yes. And it was not something that someone handed me and said, do these, and I did well. That is not at all. This was a very trial and error thing. And I think it was more in retrospect when I looked back over my journals and over sort of the course of these my late husband Ben passed 6 years ago next week that we're recording.
Wow.
And when I look back on the years that I did well and the years that I did not do well, these were the 4 things, the 4 themes, the 4 like rhythms that when I learned to really courageously do them, intentionally, to intentionally grieve and take time to cry and break down and fall apart and all the things we try so hard not to do. That's when I had freedom and margin to sort of breathe again and come back into hope. And when I learned to keep worshiping, as a believer, when I didn't feel like God was good to me, it's like when I made that choice, when I chose gratitude, when I felt like I had nothing to be thankful for, that those were the days that I had a little lightness and energy, when I chose to connect and make the call to say, I need you today, instead of withdrawing and trying to do it on my own. That those were the days that I felt kind of strong again. And on the days when I chose to imagine a life that looked different than where I was, that those were the days that I felt a little more hopeful. So when I looked back, these were the 4 things that I kept doing on the days that I did it right, Yeah. And so I sort of sat down and thought, okay, is there a way that we can walk with people who are very early in a season of trial and kind of build those muscles with them so they don't have to stumble and make the wrong choices and look back 6 years later and say, oh, I guess I should have done that every day that I could, Yeah. And so that's what I hope this is sort of a daily place for people to land and to build those muscles to live with those 4 rhythms, because I think that is how we grieve honestly and hopefully.
Both of those.
Yeah, because you have to do both,
right?
Unfortunately.
Because you can't just deny the reality.
Yeah.
But you can't be taken under by it either.
Totally. Exactly.
So this is a 365-day devotional. And so this podcast is really about connection. And I don't know if you've gotten a chance to listen to the trailer episode yet, but I actually talk about reflecting on the breadcrumbs of your life, finding the passion in childhood. Yeah. It's kind of like what you need to do to find yourself in adulthood. Yeah. So you're nailing it.
Spot on.
Yes. You didn't even realize it.
Same page.
But on day 12, it's the pillar or the practice and rhythm of connect. And the scripture is 1 Peter 5, 8, and 9. But you were talking about here, believers in pain are the enemy's top priority to prey on and to deceive. You are understandably weak right now, and he knows you are the most vulnerable when in pain and isolation. And you kind of go on to say to create an inner circle of faithful people to build you up and help you fend off the enemy's attacks. Though it's natural to withdraw, cling to your community. It will help protect you from the attacks of the prowling enemy. Do you remember writing this passage? Because this feels like, to me, this was a really, really powerful thing to read through.
I do more in the editing phase than the original. I could not tell you when that originally, was written, but I think I do remember specifically. I think a big reason, I'll speak for me, but I think this is true of a lot of people. The reason we don't connect or one of the reasons we don't want to connect or reach out is because we feel like a burden to those people, right? The inner circle people. And I remember a very specific moment where my best friend looked at me and she said, can you just try to think if the tables were turned, like, wouldn't you do anything to just try to help me at all, like to try to lighten my load today, whatever that looked like. And I was like, yeah, like I'm such a fixer. I'm such a doer. I would do anything to help you. And she goes, then let us do that for you. Like that you're taking away our ability to love you when you don't reach out, when you don't ask for help, when you don't connect, because we would give anything to help. And you kind of, as the person in need, have to take the first step. And that's not a burden. It's really a privilege for you to be vulnerable enough and trust us enough to say, hey, I'm going to open the door for you because I need you.
Yeah.
And so I remember that so poignantly. And that really was a turning point for me to quit trying to be strong and do it myself. And, I think I had this fear of being the like cloud, the little Snoopy, like whatever that guy, Linus.
Pigpen?
I don't know, whoever.
Is
anyway,
it Linus?
Botch this metaphor in such a huge way. But whatever the Charlie Brown character that sort of has the little cloud, that's how I felt. And I didn't want to be that toward people. But the truth was they weren't clouded or weighted down or burdened by me at all. Like they were just waiting for an opportunity to be there. And so I think for me, that was such a poignant turning point. And then I just see now the days where I felt withdrawn or I felt, shame for how I had not grieved well, and pulled away. Those were dark days. And when I learned to share that, with a trusted person and have them build me back up, and put the pieces together, then I felt free from that. And so, like I said, trial and error. But we need those people in the low seasons, especially, but in the high seasons, we can just as easily turn inward when we're in like the hustle season too. And that's equally as dangerous. You can implode in a happy season just as much as you can in a hard one.
For sure. Continuing to just distract yourself, whether it's from, because it's a hard time in life and you want to distract yourself, or you want to distract yourself because you are just working so hard, there is going to be an end result of that.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. Staying present with that. Can you tell the story? I can't remember if it was a raccoon or like a turkey.
Oh, the turkeys.
The remembering.
Yeah. There was, there was a moment not long after Ben passed, and we lived on Green Hills, which is a very commercial area of Nashville. And this was really, it was early on, like the first couple months, and it was a very low point of just needing a sign and an affirmation and just something to assure me, that Ben was in no pain, like that there was nothing to worry about for him. You know what I mean? Like as low and as dark as I felt, part of what got me through as a Christian was knowing and believing that Ben is perfect. Like he's won the lottery is what I always told myself. It's like the greatest joy that he ever experienced here is exponential. And so I knew that, in my mind because of what we believed, but I needed a sign of that. And I prayed over and over and over, like, can I just please have a sign that like, he's good. Like I don't need to worry. I can rejoice for him. Like I can be happy for him and brokenhearted for me. And both of those can be true. And so I was pulling out of our house and it was like a real rainy day, probably like near the holidays. So it was like, Nashville, it's gross and rainy and like 40 degrees.
Yeah.
And I look over in our neighbor's yard and his driveway and I saw some turkeys and I was like, that doesn't happen here. And I was like, that's so weird. And then I just kind of felt this like prompt to like see how many. There were a bunch. And I counted that there were these 7 turkeys. And as silly as that story is, for me in that moment, that was such a direct answer to all of those prayers that I needed of confidence in what we believe to be true, in assurance that I can be happy for him and grieve for me. All these things that I needed to know, I saw because Ben was a big turkey hunter. And that's the first time we went hunting together, they were turkeys. And even the like fact that there were 7, that's like the biblical number of wholeness and just peace and completion. And so it to me was this assurance, like you can exhale, like he is this person you love more than anything in the world will never be better than he is right now. And so there was peace in that for me, and a really big moment of assurance that like this faith that you've held so tightly to your whole life that feels really shaken is still true, and it's still sturdy ground. Like you just have to keep trusting, and so I think the moral of that for me was never hesitate to ask for assurances that you need, and whether that is from God, if you are a person of faith, or whether it's from other people that you need to speak affirmations to you. Like, that's a big part of, I think, the connection aspect is, I just interviewed a woman here who is a beautiful illustrator, and she just put her book out. And at the end of every little section, there's verbal affirmations, because she said those were things that my mom spoke over us as kids that were so powerful in us remembering and living out of the truth of who we are. And I think we can't speak enough affirmations back to ourselves, and then obviously have those people in place to speak them over us, because it's sometimes harder to say those truths to yourself than it is to say to a friend. And so that's why I think the connection part is so crucial.
I love that you said to not be afraid to ask for the assurance that you need, because I think that's totally biblical as well. And I know that at least for me right now, a lot of things I'm hearing from my girlfriends in our talks is that God is kind of speaking to us differently than he has in different seasons. And so staying really present and being open to, like, the Lord might be speaking to us in different ways, because he usually speaks to me through dreams. And so my friend was kind of saying the same thing, but she hasn't felt that lately. And so she was kind of wrestling with, am I stepping away? Am I doing something wrong? And I have felt like since I've moved to Austin, God does speak to me differently. And I think being open to, okay, Lord, like, show up. I need you in this moment. Maybe it's through 7 turkeys. Just being aware. And I think God is so kind and so intentional with that. And I do think different seasons of maturity of faith, he meets us in different ways and different avenues. And I love that you shared that story, because it is just, it's cute. Like, the Lord really speaks to us in ways that our hearts will know that was from him.
I love that. He does it, and it's not silly. And it's so, you said kind and personal. I think that's, I've been asked a lot of times, like, what did you learn about God, I guess, through this process? And I'm like, man, like, he's so intimate. Like, he's so tender and thoughtful and kind. And like, that was the sign I needed then. If I was driving out of here today on Music Row and I needed an assurance from God, it's probably not going to be 7 turkeys today. You know, it'll be different because I'm in a different season and my needs are different, and he'll speak a different language in that way. But I think he's so personal and kind in that way when we have the kind of boldness and blind optimism to say, like, I need you in the way that I need you, and I'm open to see it, even if it's a bunch of turkeys.
Totally. Talking about being in a different season, what does life look like now for you as far as connection or hospitality go? So we have your second book coming out in a couple weeks, right?
September 10th. So depending when this airs.
So you're still writing. But what does connection look like for you in this season?
I mean, with sort of the book and then my podcast, which you helped me develop and launch, it's called Enjoy Life. Like, it's INJOY. And so that's a lot of the ways that I get to keep connecting with people in a professional way, other writers and podcasters and just all my listeners and things. I think a lot of what you and I talked about in that kind of pivot from, okay, here's my first grief book. Here's a lot of work with widow organizations and things like that, is how do I maybe hear the next, kind of prompt from God? Like, where does this gift and this desire to write and connect, how does it shift as my life shifts? And I think that's a big part of why I love that show, because I think a lot of what I learned in the depths is the agency we have to choose joy in small ways. And so, to be able to move from being in the valley, is, my book's called Through the Valley of Grief, to then coming into a season of real joy and what I would call a big mountaintop, place in life. Like, I've gotten remarried. Like, I had a baby 2 months ago. And so I think all of these things that I grieved when I lost Ben, because I had lost them with him, I had lost the marriage we had and the family that we had planned for, to then move into the just redemption of being able to have it with this amazing new man and this new life. Like, that's joy unmatched. And so to keep listening really to God, and this, I'm so glad you asked this. This is truly like a thing I've grappled with this summer, kind of just taking time away with the baby, is like, can I still do this? Do I still have a message to share? Do I still have a story to tell? Or like, am I going to wrap it up as the grief girl and then move on with my life? To be honest, that's a really big fear that I've had. And so I love that you say we hear from God differently, but I think a big thing that he's been teaching me is that it's not necessarily that he hands us this big capital P purpose that like, you know, transcends our whole life and all of our work. It's that he gives us different messages at different times, and that those skill sets will be used, but the message and the platform, you know, may be different. So to be open to that, you know, has been something that I'm in real time trying to understand. So I think I just pivoted a big way from your question. I'm connecting in the podcast and the book, but
I like that, because I do say a lot of times our value and our purpose in Christ never change. Like we are here to reflect the kingdom and to honor Christ during our time here on earth. And to your point, I think our assignments change in different seasons.
That's a good word. Yeah. Assignment.
You were in Austin for 2 years. You had your restaurant for a couple of years. You wrote your first book. You wrote your second book. Your purpose in Christ never changed. Your assignment for that season did. And I think there is an art and a prompting of the Holy Spirit to know when a season starts and when a season ends.
Yeah. That is one of the hardest things, I think, personally, that I've struggled with. Because for me, you know, as an Enneagram 3 and just as Mattie, the way that I am made, when those seasons end, I have a real struggle and I have a real time that I have to commit to process. This isn't necessarily a failure, because that always feels like a failure to me. And so I think to learn that like closing a chapter and being grateful for all the muscles that came from that and the connections that came from that and the strengths that came from that, you know, that's not a failure. That's just the next assignment. I love that word. And I think, you know, to kind of think back full circle, you were talking at the beginning about people who inspire you. Dad, you know, in his career, I have seen him over and over stay 100% true to his voice, to his writing style, to who he is, but then take on these different projects and grow. And like the actual story, if you listen, and we've done this a lot with our new son, not that he can hear the lyrics or know, but we play his music for him, you know, and it's like going through albums from 1990, 91, 92 to 3 years ago. The stories he's telling are different because he's 30 years older, but the heart is the same, you know, and the lyricism is the same. And so I think I've been trying to focus a lot on that now, is like, how do I stay truly who I am in my voice, even if the message and the platform and the work might be different.
Yeah. And I do think that is the closing or an ending of an assignment or a season. It does not mean a failure. And I do think a lot of times comparison and other people's thoughts, what other people are doing, can kind of start to cloud what we can do in and of ourselves. And I always say, like, if you know your assignment, you never stay too long and you never start too early.
That's great.
But staying in the presence of the Lord is the only way to know how to find and choose both of those bookends.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited for what this upcoming season has for you, because you are, unfortunately at this point, an expert on grief, and you are so much more than that too, Mattie. You are fun and you are lively and you are funny and witty, but you also, your wit and your humor is matched with your depth. And so I'm so glad, even though we can't remember how our paths crossed, I'm so glad that
it was intentional, and it is a breadcrumb that's there, whether we can pinpoint it or not.
Yes.
No, I'm really grateful.
Would you like to share a couple glasses of wine?
I would love
to wrap this conversation up.
Let me tell you, let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. So I have 2 wines today.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm on a wine show. Wait, I love this. We're pivoting. No longer napkin notes. This is now just cocktail tastings. So I have a Sancerre, also known as a censor from the wine people yesterday.
Depending on what store you go to.
And then I will let you read through that if you need to. But what are we like smelling for? What are we tasting for with this bottle of wine, do you think?
So Sancerre has sort of become, I don't want to say go-to, because it's probably more of a like $25 to $30 bottle of white. But it is a Sauvignon Blanc. So kind of when I was speaking earlier about, you know, a little bit less even knowing, like, do I like Sauvignon Blanc? Do I like Pinot Grigio? Do I like Chardonnay? This is what I would call a very crisp and like high acid white wine, meaning it's great for hot weather. It's great for like citrusy foods, even spicy foods. It'll kind of tame down that spice. So for me, I mean, when you smell, you're really just kind of, I think, wetting your palate. Like your taste is something like 80% olfactory senses. And so when people do that, they're just kind of like, I think, warming themselves up for what they're going to experience.
Okay.
But yeah, it's crisp. It's all those things that I kind of mentioned, like citrusy.
So say apple.
Yeah, I love like kind of a lemon-y, a rindy kind of thing. There's like a little bit of a bitter, like almondy vibe to this, I think, too, which I like. But again, I mentioned the oak. The big thing is, I mean, do you smell anything like toasty, marshmallowy, buttery, yogurty? You don't get those sort of like creamy notes off of this because there's no oak. So you just learn, okay, do I like this really crisp unoaked style, or would I like a little bit richer, flavors and fuller body?
So marshmallowy would still be oaky.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah. Just kind of those sweets, those like campfire and
okay,
butterscotch candy kind of vibes.
Staying on the farm right now, and the miniature pony is called Butterscotch. And he sits in the front yard in the morning while I drink my coffee.
That's a great pony name.
So,
okay, well, you taste and tell me what you think.
Ooh, I love that. What is that called?
ASMR. Swirl right in the mic.
That's really smooth.
Easy drinking.
Citrusy.
Light. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's sweet, but it's definitely not like that buttery Chardonnay.
No, it's a very dry wine. I like it because I feel like it's very versatile with food, but it's also super refreshing to just sit. You mentioned the patio. We were talking earlier about memories. I will never forget my high school girlfriends coming to visit me when I lived in Austin. We were eating on 2nd Street, Second Bar and Kitchen. I'm sure it's not there anymore.
I think it is.
It is?
Yeah.
And them saying, I don't like white wine. It's too sweet. And I'm like, I'm going to order this Sancerre.
Yeah.
And by God, if y'all don't like it, I'll finish it.
Yes.
But we're going to get it. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is so great. So they always say like, oh, you turned me on to white wine with Sancerre in Austin. So it's like, it's a great entry if you don't typically like white wines.
And I'm not usually a white wine drinker, but this is one I would go back for.
It's
for
perfect.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, this is just also a French Sauvignon Blanc. So if you were to like this style, and you want sort of an everyday, like $10 to $15 bottle, there's plenty of French Sauvignon Blancs that are very similar to Sancerre. And that's kind of where I live in the heat of summer.
I think this was $32.99. I texted Mattie last night, can you give me 2 bottles, 1 red, 1 white, around the $20 to $30 price point. Pretty affordable, very easy, also impressive. So I would totally do this for a girls' night. Shall we go on to the red?
Let's.
Okay, so we have a second one here, which was Maddie's second suggestion for us, which is a Nebbiolo. This is a 2022. I think this was $18.99.
Yeah.
Super affordable, maybe $21, but very much in that price range.
Yeah.
So obviously we're going with the red, which I'm usually a red wine drinker. Tell us a little bit about this one.
So I think you accidentally teed us up perfectly for this tasting with your story about your first time in Austin, which is apparently a theme to our conversation.
Yes.
Barolo is the highest end production of Nebbiolo.
Okay.
So Barolo is 100% Nebbiolo. It is kind of a unique little grape that is indigenous to Italy. It's grown almost exclusively in the northwestern part of Italy. There are some producers in California and Napa that will do like a one-off Nebbiolo that's really cool because the climate is similar. But it is my sleeper recommendation for anyone who likes a dry red wine.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be, again, back to oak. It's not going to be as oaky as like full-bodied, as toasty and chocolatey and coffee as a lot of like Cabernets. It's going to be a little bit lighter. You can even see when you look at it, like it's transparent. You can see through it because it doesn't have tons of oak on it, but it is equally as dry, as sort of like masculine and muscular. It's kind of like, I always describe Nebbiolo as like having the swimmer body. Ooh. Like it's not a big football player like Cabernet. It's a little leaner and a little lighter, but it's still very dry, still very tannic. Yeah, very, very much made for meats and rich cheeses and things like that.
Okay.
But
the swimmer body of the wine.
A little tighter.
I love that. Okay, let's give us a sip.
Yeah.
Sorry to have you into yours.
You feel that tannic kind of dry grip at the end?
Yeah. That's why you kind of want to do like that.
So it still has that, like a larger red wine, but it's a little bit lighter for, again, warmer seasons. But much stronger, in structure than a Pinot, and a little less fruity. So if you like dry, if you like that sort of that tannic, that kind of drying sensation in a red, but you don't want fruity. I love Nebbiolo. And
I feel
again,
like
amazing with food.
I'm sitting on like a countryside back home in Virginia at a winery drinking this with like a
They
good little
make
cheese
Nebbiolo
plate.
in Virginia. I forgot to say they really do. They do in wine country there.
Okay, well that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe my taste buds aren't super off then.
Yeah.
But yeah, this tastes like what I would have back in Virginia.
Yeah.
And I
it's,
love that.
As you mentioned, a great price point. Like your Barolo is very high end, but
Yes.
same grape. It's just made from, lower elevation vineyards, and it's not aged as long, essentially.
Okay,
So
perfect.
you can still get that baby Barolo vibe here, which I love.
Yeah, because I do usually go for a cab, but in the summer it's just too hot.
It's too much.
Yeah, it's not what I needed.
Yeah.
This will be my new go-to.
I love Nebbiolo.
If you had to choose one for tonight, if you were going to have one with dinner, which one would you be going for today?
Well, I will say on my dinner queue tonight is salmon, so I'd probably
Go with the white.
go with the Sancerre.
Yep.
But we are coming off Labor Day weekend, and if you're doing any sort of grilling, I think Nebbiolo is awesome because it's, again, light enough. So if you do like chicken or a blackened fish or something like that, it's not going to overpower it. But if you're doing the hamburgers or the ribeye or whatever, it can hold its own in every way. So that's my recommendation.
You over-delivered with both of these. I thought
They
for
are
sure
my
there would be a
favorite
fan favorite
wines.
between the two, but
No.
now you nailed it.
I love it. This was such a treat in every way.
Mattie, thanks for being on. One last question.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned both your mom and your dad were kind of influences to help craft your passions growing up. Was there something that one or both of them said to you that, let's say you were leaving a little note on a napkin for a stranger, that you would like to leave them with?
I mean, it is specific to dad and me as writers, but I mean, he has always said about his career, the reason that it's had the longevity, and success that it has is that he says, I write about my real life. And so for me, that has quite literally been what has happened. But I think also everything we talked about is your life is going to look different in different seasons. And as long as you're true to who you are and you tell the story of your real life in that season, then like that's what people are going to connect to the most. And so I think I would say that, just like tell the story of your real life,
I love that.
Yeah.
Mattie, thank you so much for being on. This has been such a delight.
It's been wonderful. Cheers.
Cheers.